The billionaire thought he could humiliate her in front of the world, but what happened next shattered everything he thought he knew about power, loyalty, and betrayal. If you want to see how this epic twist plays out and how Zora turns the tables on Ethan, hit that subscribe button now. You won't want to miss the next shocking reveal. The lights dimmed, the crowd fell into an expectant hush, and Ethan Montgomery took the stage. With a confident smile, he glanced at Zora sitting beside him, a woman who had stood by his side for years, who had helped build his empire. "I'm divorcing you," he announced, his voice loud and clear, his words carrying over the soft hum of whispers in the room. "The company is mine now. I've got everything I need: money, power, and beauty. Why would I need someone like you?" Zora's heart didn't race, nor did her pulse quicken. Instead, she calmly stood, her eyes narrowing slightly, as she reached for the microphone. The crowd stilled, waiting for her response. She smiled, not the smile of someone defeated, but the smile of someone who had been patiently waiting for this moment. With a steady voice, Zora spoke. "I think you've misunderstood, Ethan. It seems you forgot to check your own records. You see, I own 85% of this company." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Ethan's face went pale. His smug confidence crumbled. The room buzzed with disbelief as the man who thought he had the upper hand now found himself at the mercy of his wife's hidden strength. As the guests murmured, Zora turned and walked toward the exit, her composure unshaken. In that single moment, Ethan had lost everything, and Zora had just taken it all back. The golden chandeliers above glinted like stars as Ethan Montgomery stepped up to the microphone, the buzz of conversation fading instantly. Zora sat beside him, the weight of the moment settling over her. She had known something was off all night, but nothing could have prepared her for what Ethan was about to do. "I'm divorcing you," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness of the gala. "The company is mine now. I've got everything: money, power, beauty. Why would I need someone like you?" The words hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and deliberate. Zora's chest tightened for a split second, but she didn't react. She didn't flinch. The crowd was watching, a sea of unfamiliar faces eager for the spectacle. Ethan had thought this would be his moment of triumph, to stake his claim in front of everyone. But what he didn't know was that Zora had been quietly preparing for this day, preparing for a moment just like this. She turned slowly, her gaze fixed on Ethan for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. His smug grin faltered as he caught her eye. The silence stretched, thick with anticipation, as Zora stood and reached for the microphone. Her movements were deliberate, her composure unshaken. She wasn't the woman he thought she was anymore. The room watched as she lifted the mic to her lips, her voice smooth but steady. "I think you've misunderstood, Ethan," she began, her tone calm, even measured. "It seems you forgot to check your own records. You see, I own 85% of this company. It's always been mine." The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted from the crowd, and for the first time that evening, Ethan's flawless facade cracked. His smile froze, his eyes wide with disbelief, as the realization of what Zora had just said washed over him. The murmur of shocked voices spread like wildfire across the room. Zora didn't wait for Ethan to recover. She stepped back, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she turned to face the crowd. The spotlight, once on Ethan, now shifted to her. But she didn't need the attention. What mattered now was that she'd taken back control. The tables had turned in an instant, and it wasn't about winning in front of an audience. It was about making Ethan understand who really held the power. The gala, once filled with laughter and polite conversation, was now chaos. Zora could feel the tension in the room, but she kept walking, her posture straight, her face a picture of calm. Ethan stood frozen, his hand still gripping the mic as if it could shield him from the truth she had just laid bare. The crowd parted before her as she made her way toward the exit. The moment was hers now. Ethan had thought he could break her with his public humiliation, but Zora wasn't broken. She was stronger than he had ever known. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, she felt the weight of the evening lift from her shoulders. The battle had begun, and it was far from over, but one thing was clear. This time, she was the one in control. The door to the penthouse clicked shut behind Zora as she stepped inside, the weight of the night still pressing on her chest. Her fingers brushed against the polished wood of the table as she moved through the room, her mind already racing. Ethan had humiliated her in front of everyone, but that had been his mistake. Now it was her turn to play the game, on her terms. She sank into the leather chair by the window, looking out at the city below. The lights shimmered like 1,000 possibilities, each one a different path. But for now, there was only one thing she needed to do: assess the damage, understand the true scope of Ethan's betrayals, and prepare for what was coming next. The first thing she did was pull out her phone and dial a number she knew well. Jason Mitchell, her lawyer. He was meticulous, efficient, and had always been on her side, something she'd learned over the years when she'd trusted few others. "Jason, it's Zora," she said when he picked up. "I need everything: financials, shareholder details, legal loopholes. Ethan's playing dirty, and I need to know how far he's gone." She could hear the rustling of papers on the other end as he got to work. "I'll have it for you in an hour. Do you want to move fast on this?" "I want to own him," Zora replied, her voice low but fierce. "No more games." She hung up and then immediately reached out to her financial advisor, Maria Patel. Maria had handled her personal accounts for years, but Zora needed her expertise now more than ever. There was too much at stake, too many pieces to consider. The company wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of everything she had built, her legacy. "Maria," she said when Maria answered, "we need to move quickly. I want to secure my position, lock down my assets, and make sure I can maneuver without Ethan being able to touch anything. No surprises. You understand?" "I've already been monitoring the market, Zora. I'll make sure your holdings are protected. We'll use your majority stake strategically. Don't worry." Zora exhaled, feeling a fraction of the weight ease from her shoulders. Maria's words were always calm, always certain. That's why she trusted her. With the phone calls made, Zora turned her attention to Ethan's empire. She needed to understand every detail of his financial manipulations, how he'd used her for years and kept her in the dark about the true scope of the company's debts, his secret dealings with outside investors, and his power plays to secure a monopoly. She needed to know who his allies were, and more importantly, how she could use their loyalty to her advantage. As the hours stretched into the early morning, Zora pored over the documents that arrived, each one more revealing than the last. She traced every deal, every shady investment, and every corporate maneuver. Ethan had thought he could run everything from the shadows, keeping her in the dark, but now she saw the full picture. His arrogance had blinded him, and she could use that. Zora smiled to herself, the first real smile she'd had since the gala. She wasn't just playing defense anymore. She was setting the stage for her victory. Ethan had made a dangerous enemy, but she was about to show him how dangerous she could be. The game had changed, and Zora Washington was ready to win. Ethan had no idea how deeply he'd miscalculated. In the days following the gala, Zora played her part perfectly. She kept her distance from the public eye, retreating to the solace of her office, her apartment, wherever she could stay hidden from the prying eyes of the world. The phone calls, the questions, the speculation, it all came in waves, relentless. But Zora didn't rush to answer them. Instead, she let the whispers swirl around her, knowing that her silence would speak louder than anything she could say. The media frenzy that had followed Ethan's dramatic announcement of their divorce painted her as the victim, just as Ethan had intended. The world saw her as the betrayed wife, the one left in the wake of her husband's ambition and arrogance. They didn't know that beneath the calm exterior, Zora was calculating every move. She had seen this kind of game before. knew how to navigate the murky waters of corporate politics, and most importantly, she understood the power of perception. Ethan thought she would crumble under the pressure of the public humiliation, that she would break in the face of his carefully crafted narrative. But Zora wasn't that woman anymore. He had underestimated her strength, her ability to bide her time and strike when it mattered most. She had already started making quiet moves behind the scenes, shoring up her position within the company. One by one, she reached out to the people who still believed in her, trusted employees, board members who had always respected her for her intellect and poise. They were the ones who knew the truth, the ones who had seen the way Ethan had eroded the company from within, using his charm to cover up his many mistakes. They were tired of the charade, and they were ready for a change. Zora wasn't just gathering allies. She was solidifying her foundation, one piece at a time. She scheduled discreet meetings with key stakeholders, making sure they understood that her majority stake wasn't just a piece of paper. It was power. Slowly, she began to weave a network of support, people who would stand by her when the moment came. There was no rush. She didn't need to force anything. The storm was coming, but Zora was in no hurry to provoke it. Each day, she let Ethan believe that his arrogance had crushed her, that the humiliation he had dealt her would be enough to make her fold. But Zora was anything but defeated. She watched, waited, and planned. Her moves were quiet, calculated, like a predator biding its time, knowing when to strike. The world might have seen a woman on the verge of breaking, but Zora saw a woman poised to rebuild. She had already begun the work, slowly, methodically, and when the time was right, she would make her move. Ethan had thought he could control her. He was wrong, and when she finally took the stage, she would show him just how wrong he was. The more Zora dug, the clearer it became. Ethan's empire was built on secrets, lies, and a careful illusion of invincibility. The man who had once charmed her with his promises of endless success had been playing a far more dangerous game all along. His moves, which seemed so calculated and precise, were riddled with compromises, manipulations, and debts he had hidden from her. She sat in the quiet of her office, the soft hum of the city outside barely reaching her ears as she scrolled through the documents. With each file, each email chain, her suspicions turned into certainty. Ethan had leveraged not only their marriage, but also the company to line his pockets and play power games with investors who didn't understand the real risks they were taking. There were offshore accounts, shell companies, deals made in the dead of night, and all of it under the guise of business as usual. Ethan had convinced everyone, including her, that he was the mastermind, the visionary. But Zora knew better now. It was time to put the pieces together. She pieced through the records, her sharp mind connecting dots that Ethan had long believed hidden. One by one, she found the cracks in his carefully constructed facade, loans he had taken out against company assets, kickbacks he had arranged with suppliers, and the backroom deals with investors who had no idea they were being played. What troubled her more, though, was the discovery that Ethan had been working with people she never would have expected. Board members she had trusted, employees who had always sworn loyalty to her. The depth of his betrayal ran deeper than she could have imagined, but Zora didn't react, not yet. The storm she would unleash had to be perfect, precise. She wasn't going to let Ethan see her coming. Slowly, she set her traps, baiting each one carefully. She reached out to the right people, making sure she got the documents she needed without arousing suspicion. She fed small bits of information to the board members she had cultivated, letting them see the same patterns of deception that had ensnared her. Zora knew that to beat Ethan, she had to make sure no one doubted her integrity. She couldn't just fight him on the business front. She had to win over the people who mattered. They had to see her as the leader who would restore what Ethan had tainted, and she would, on her terms. In the meantime, Ethan, ever the opportunist, continued to stretch his influence, blissfully unaware of the precision with which Zora was preparing her next moves. She played the role of the wronged wife flawlessly, giving him no reason to suspect that she had already uncovered his darkest secrets. All the while, she let him believe that she had nothing left to lose. Zora wasn't reckless. She wasn't driven by emotion or revenge. She was calculating, patient, and now, more than ever, she was ready. She was ready to take back what was hers, piece by piece, step by step, and when the moment came, Ethan wouldn't see it coming. Zora's moves were subtle, like a chess player making the smallest adjustments to the board, knowing that each quiet shift would eventually lead to a checkmate. She had been careful, methodical, building her base of support in the shadows. As the days passed, the ripple effects of her calculated actions began to surface. First, there was Caroline Pierce, the head of corporate strategy. Zora had always respected Caroline's sharp intellect, but she hadn't realized just how disillusioned Caroline had become with Ethan's leadership. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling meeting where Ethan had dismissed yet another of Caroline's proposals with a casual smirk, Zora made her move. She invited Caroline for a drink after work, under the pretense of catching up. Over wine, Zora listened. Caroline spoke of the frustrations that had been simmering for months, of the decisions that had been forced through with little transparency, of the way Ethan had isolated the board and treated them like pawns. As Caroline talked, Zora's mind worked, quietly pulling the threads together. By the end of the night, Caroline had agreed to support Zora, quietly, discreetly, but firmly. It was the first victory in a series of small but crucial wins. Zora's phone was always buzzing now, calls from trusted allies, texts from board members who had started to question Ethan's leadership. She had been reaching out to them one by one, not forcing their loyalty, but gently coaxing them toward her side. It wasn't about making promises. It was about showing them what Ethan had been hiding, his manipulations, his disregard for their input, the way he had used the company's assets as leverage for personal gain. Each conversation, each meeting, each quiet gesture of support built the foundation she needed. In the quiet hours of the night, Zora reviewed her strategy. Her majority stake in the company, once a hidden advantage, was now her weapon. The 85% ownership she held gave her the power to reshape the board, to remove Ethan from his throne and reclaim her rightful position. All she needed now was the right moment. She could feel it building, the tension, the anticipation. She had waited long enough. She sent out the invitations for the board meeting. There was no turning back now. Ethan would have no idea what was coming. She had secured enough votes to outnumber him, to sway the opinions of those who still clung to his leadership but were beginning to waver. The company was hers for the taking. Zora felt a calm certainty settle over her. For weeks, she had played the part of the wronged wife, the woman who had been publicly humiliated, the woman who had lost everything. But that had only been the surface. Now, the real battle was about to begin. She wasn't just reclaiming what was hers, she was taking control of everything Ethan had taken for granted. The boardroom would be her stage, and this time it was Ethan who would be the one left exposed. Ethan had always believed he was untouchable. His confidence, once magnetic, now bordered on arrogance. He had underestimated Zora, convinced that her calm exterior and quiet demeanor meant she would crumble under the weight of his betrayal. But Zora wasn't crumbling. She was building. And Ethan's growing complacency would be his undoing. The cracks in his carefully constructed empire were starting to show. Zora watched, waiting for him to make a mistake, and he did, time and time again. His arrogance led him to make decisions without consulting her, assuming that he had already silenced her and gained the upper hand. He continued to push forward with his expansion plans, cutting deals with shady investors, confident that no one would dare question his authority. But Zora was no longer just a silent observer. She had spent weeks collecting every piece of evidence, every financial misstep, every under-the-table deal he had made. She had seen the emails, the bank transfers, the whispers of board members who had quietly distanced themselves from Ethan's reckless leadership. She knew that Ethan's desire for power had blinded him to the risks, and now it was time for him to face the consequences of his own ambition. The board meeting was set. Zora had carefully orchestrated every detail, ensuring she had the necessary votes to unseat Ethan. But before that, she would make her move. She sent out the carefully prepared documents, each piece of evidence meticulously laid out, highlighting Ethan's mismanagement and deceit. She knew this would be the turning point, the moment when Ethan's facade would crumble. As the day of the meeting approached, the tension between them grew palpable. Ethan, still convinced that his charm and influence would win over the board, continued to underestimate Zora's resolve. He would often laugh off her warnings, dismissing her as a mere pawn in his game. "You're overthinking it," he would say, a smirk playing on his lips. "This is just how business works." Zora never responded, never gave him the satisfaction of an argument. She simply waited. Then came the moment. The boardroom, once a place where Ethan had commanded the room, became a battleground. As the members settled into their seats, Zora's calm voice broke the silence. "Gentlemen, I believe you've all seen the documents I've shared." She let the weight of her words hang in the air, watching as the eyes of the board members shifted nervously. One by one, she laid out Ethan's failures, his reckless spending, the unauthorized deals, the backroom agreements with investors who had no interest in the company's future. Each revelation landed like a punch. She watched as Ethan's confident demeanor faltered, his eyes darting from face to face, trying to gauge the room. "You've been running this company into the ground, Ethan," Zora continued, her voice steady, unwavering. "And you've done it at the expense of everyone who trusted you." Ethan's face darkened, his pride wounded, but it was too late. The unraveling had begun. The board, once his loyal followers, were now questioning his every move. Zora had set her trap, and Ethan had walked right into it. The silence that followed felt deafening. Zora knew the battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, she could see the fear in Ethan's eyes, and that was all the confirmation she needed. His reign was crumbling, and Zora was finally ready to take her place. The room was packed, the buzz of whispers swirling like static in the air. Zora stood at the front of the conference hall, the polished surface of the table reflecting the tense faces of the board members and the investors who had gathered for the long-awaited company announcement. Ethan, as usual, sat at the head of the table, his expression one of confident assurance, as if he was still the undisputed ruler of everything in this room. But Zora knew what he didn't. The game had already shifted, and the pieces were no longer in his favor. She glanced at him for a moment, his eyes flickering with that familiar arrogance. He had no idea what was coming, no idea that today would be the day his empire began to crumble beneath him. As the minutes ticked by, Zora allowed the silence to stretch, knowing it only heightened the anticipation. The tension in the room was palpable, the audience waiting for something, anything, to break the calm. Then, with a deliberate breath, Zora stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the room with an authority that made the murmurings fade into a hush. "Thank you for being here today. I've called this meeting for one reason only, to set the record straight." She paused, allowing the words to sink in, and turned her gaze toward Ethan. He shifted uncomfortably, though his smile never wavered, as if he were still trying to maintain control of the room. Zora knew the truth, though. He was already losing it. She didn't wait any longer. "As many of you are aware, the company has been through some rough patches in the last few months," Zora continued, her tone steady, unwavering. "But what you don't know is that those rough patches were not accidents. They were not just the result of market fluctuations or bad timing. They were orchestrated." She let the weight of her words settle into the silence. Ethan's face had gone pale, but he said nothing. He could feel the shift in the room, the uncomfortable attention now fully trained on him. Zora didn't hold back. "I have gathered evidence over the past few weeks, evidence of mismanagement, secret deals with investors, and reckless financial decisions made under Ethan's leadership. He has, in fact, been siphoning funds and funneling them into private ventures, all the while using the company's name to cover his tracks. The room erupted in whispers. Zora could hear Ethan's sharp intake of breath, his fingers gripping the edge of the table, but he still didn't speak. His eyes darted across the room, seeking any ally, any face that still believed in him, but the damage had been done. "I have the documents," Zora went on, pulling out the stack of files she had prepared, placing them on the table with deliberate precision. "And I intend to make them public, if necessary. The truth is out, Ethan. You've been playing everyone, and now it's time for you to answer for it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Zora's calm, composed demeanor stood in stark contrast to Ethan's frozen expression. His once commanding presence was gone, replaced by a man who was realizing too late that his lies had caught up with him. "The company will not survive if we continue down this path," Zora said, her voice now cutting through the stillness like a knife. "But it will thrive, under new leadership." The finality of her words rang through the room. Ethan didn't even try to speak. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of his own lies had finally broken him. The board members looked at one another, exchanging glances, the realization dawning that Zora was the one who truly had control. Zora turned to the investors, her gaze steady. "I will be taking over as CEO. This company will be restored, and we will rebuild, together." Ethan sat there, isolated. The room no longer respected him. Zora had not only exposed his treachery, but had taken back what was rightfully hers. As she walked to the door, she could feel the weight of the moment settle into place. She had won. The courtroom was packed, a tense hush hanging in the air as the lawyers took their places. The battle had moved from the boardroom to the legal arena, and Zora had expected nothing less. Ethan's pride had been wounded, and now he was seeking revenge through the only means left to him: litigation. His accusations were as predictable as they were desperate: financial misconduct, abuse of power, and manipulation of company funds. He'd filed the claims almost immediately after Zora's announcement, hoping to drag her through a public spectacle and discredit her in the eyes of the world. But Zora knew this was his last play. He was trying to salvage what little remained of his reputation, but in doing so, he had made one fatal mistake: underestimating her. The first day of the trial, Zora kept her composure. She sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, surrounded by her team of lawyers, listening to the accusations as if they were an afterthought. Ethan's attorney, a sharp-tongued litigator with a reputation for ruthless tactics, painted a picture of Zora as a woman who had betrayed her husband and stolen from the company they had built together. The charges were ludicrous, but the courtroom buzzed with uncertainty. Ethan had once been the company's golden boy, and his story of a wronged, betrayed spouse was a powerful one. Zora didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she let the lawyer's words wash over her, knowing they would only strengthen the case she was about to present. On the second day, it was her turn. Her lawyer, Jason Mitchell, stood up with quiet confidence, presenting the defense. He spoke of her commitment to the company, of her years of hard work and dedication, and then, piece by piece, the evidence began to unfold. Zora had prepared meticulously for this moment. She had the documents, the emails, the financial records that proved Ethan had been embezzling funds, using company assets for personal gain, and forging deals behind closed doors. The truth, once hidden in the shadows, was now exposed in full view. As each document was presented, Ethan's face grew more rigid, more pale. His attorney, who had once seemed so confident, now struggled to maintain composure. Zora remained calm throughout, her eyes steady as she watched Ethan squirm in his seat, realizing that the empire he had so carefully constructed was crumbling under the weight of his own deceit. The turning point came when Zora's team presented a series of audio recordings, conversations between Ethan and a handful of shady investors. These conversations, in which he discussed using the company's funds to cover his personal debts, were undeniable. The room went silent as the recordings played, each word a dagger in Ethan's defense. His arrogance had been his downfall. He had never imagined that Zora would have the foresight to gather such damning evidence. By the end of the trial, Ethan had no ground left to stand on. His claims of financial misconduct against Zora had backfired spectacularly. The judge's ruling came swiftly. Zora was cleared of all charges, while Ethan was ordered to sell back his remaining shares in the company and step down from any future involvement. As Zora walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the victory settled over her. It hadn't been about revenge. It had been about justice. Ethan had made the mistake of thinking he could break her, but Zora had proven that her patience, her strategy, and her unwavering resolve were stronger than any legal battle he could wage. She had reclaimed not only the company, but her own integrity, and in that moment she knew she had won something far more valuable than any courtroom victory. The final ruling was everything Zora had hoped for, but it was also everything she had expected. Ethan had fought with everything he had, his money, his influence, his pride, but none of it mattered in the end. The truth had been laid bare, and the consequences were inevitable. Zora had spent months preparing for this moment, and now it was here. Ethan's name would be stripped from the company he thought he controlled, and Zora would rise from the ashes of their fractured marriage to claim her rightful place as the leader of Vance Enterprises. The courtroom had been the battleground, but the real war was fought in silence, in the quiet, steady work Zora had put in behind the scenes. She hadn't just defeated Ethan in court. She had outsmarted him, outmaneuvered him, and exposed him for the fraud he was. Her victory was not just a legal one, but a personal one, a reclaiming of everything she had lost to his manipulation. Zora stood in the lobby of the courthouse for a moment, the weight of the case finally lifting from her shoulders. The press would soon swarm, cameras flashing, eager for their piece of the drama. But for now, Zora allowed herself a brief moment of peace. She had won. Ethan was finished, and she had come through stronger than she had ever been. The days following the trial were a whirlwind of meetings, press conferences, and a flurry of legal and financial maneuvers as Zora took control of the company once and for all. Ethan's shares were transferred to her, his seat at the board taken away. He was nothing now, a disgraced former CEO with no say in the company he had once thought was his kingdom. But Zora didn't focus on his downfall. She didn't gloat or take pleasure in his defeat. Instead, she focused on rebuilding. The company was hers now, and with it, the opportunity to finally take it in the direction she had always known it could go. Her voice, calm and decisive, echoed through the boardroom as she outlined her vision for the future, a vision built on transparency, integrity, and innovation. When she addressed the board for the first time as CEO, the weight of the moment settled over her. The men and women who had once whispered behind her back, who had doubted her, now looked to her with respect. She was no longer the wife of the powerful billionaire. She was the one in charge. Zora had become something more than what anyone had expected, more than even she had expected. She had transformed, not just from a woman wronged, but into the architect of her own future. The applause that followed her first address to the company was deafening, but Zora didn't let it cloud her focus. The road ahead was still long, but she was ready for it. She had won the battle, but now it was time to build something even greater, something that would stand the test of time. As she sat in her new office, overlooking the city skyline, Zora finally allowed herself to feel the weight of her transformation. She had reclaimed everything she had lost, her business, her dignity, her sense of self. She was no longer the betrayed wife. She was the powerful woman in charge, and nothing would take that from her again.